So, you know that feeling, right? You're working on a React project, and you find yourself copy-pasting the exact same chunk of code from one component to another. It feels wrong. But what are you supposed to do? Well, in this explainer, we're going to take that frustration and turn it into a superpower. We're going to master one of React's most powerful features, custom hooks.
Here's how we're going to do it. First up, we'll nail down the problem of code duplication, just so we're all on the same page. Then we'll reveal the solution, custom hooks. And we're not just going to talk about them, we're going to build one from scratch. After that, we'll cover the rules of the road for writing good hooks, and wrap up by making them production ready with testing and performance tips. All right, let's dive right in. Let's talk about a problem that I'm willing to bet every single one of us has run into, the trap of the quick copy-paste. I mean, does this sound familiar? You write this awesome piece of logic for a component. Let's say it checks if the user's online. Works like a charm. But then, you realize you need that exact same logic somewhere else in a totally different component. What's the fastest way? You know it. Copy-paste, and just hope you remember to update both if something changes.
And this right here is the perfect picture of that problem. On the left, we've got a status bar component. It needs to know if we're online. And on the right, a save button, which also needs to know if we're online so it can disable itself. Look at the code. The useState, the uEffect, it's literally identical. This isn't just messy, it's a maintenance nightmare. If you find a bug in one, you have to remember to fix it in the other. It's super fragile, and honestly, we can do way better.
So, how do we break out of this copy-paste nightmare? Well, that brings us to the hero of our story, custom hooks.
So, what in the world is a custom hook? When you boil it all down, it's just a regular JavaScript function. That's it. But it follows two very important rules. Rule 1, its name has to start with the word use. Rule 2, it's allowed to call other hooks inside of it, like useState or useEffect. That's the whole secret. This simple pattern is what lets us pull stateful logic out of our components and turn it into reusable magic.
Okay, pay attention because this quote from the React docs is the absolute key. This is the big aha moment. Custom hooks let you reuse logic, but, and this is critical, they do not share state. Every single time a component uses your custom hook, it gets its own fresh, isolated, independent version of the state inside. This is amazing. You get all the reusability you want with zero risk of components stepping on each other's toes.
So why is this so much better than older ways of doing things, like higher-order components? Well, for one, it's just cleaner. Your components can focus on what they're good at, the UI, while the messy logic is tucked away. You totally avoid that dreaded wrapper hell, where your component tree is like a dozen nested dolls. And as a huge bonus, testing your logic becomes a million times easier because you can test it all by itself.
All right, enough theory. The best way to really get this is to get our hands dirty. So let's build one of the most useful custom hooks you'll ever write, a useFetch hook to handle API calls. We're going to build this piece by piece. First up, we obviously need a place to put the data we get back. So we'll start with a useState call. Simple enough. Next, we use useEffect to actually go and grab the data. Now that little empty array at the end of the useEffect is super important. It tells React, hey, only run this fetch logic one time right when the component first shows up.
Okay, a basic fetch is cool, but a great hook anticipates what our components will need. So let's add a loading indicator and some error handling. We'll add a new piece of state called isLoading. Flip it to true right before we make the request, and flip it back to false when we're done. Then we wrap the whole thing in a try-catch block. If anything goes wrong, we catch the error and save it in another state variable. Now we're cooking.
And voila, there it is. Look how clean that is. All that logic, managing data, loading states, error states, is now wrapped up in one beautiful, self-contained, reusable function. Now, any component in our entire app that needs to fetch data can just call useFetch and get everything it needs. That is powerful.
Okay, so now you know how to build a hook, but let's talk about how to build a good one. Following a few simple best practices will make your hooks way more maintainable and easy for others to use. All right, let's go over the rules of the road. If you only remember one thing from this section, make it this one. Always, always, always start your custom hook's name with the word use. This isn't just a naming convention, it's a signal to React's tools to check for errors and make sure you're following the rules. It's a huge deal. Beyond that, the advice is just good engineering. Keep your hooks focused, make them flexible, and please, write a little documentation for your teammates and your future self.
Awesome. For our final section, let's get into some more advanced topics that will take your hooks from good to absolutely production grade, testing and performance. Testing UI can be tricky. But one of the best things about custom hooks is that they're just functions, which makes them way easier to test. The React testing library gives us this incredible tool called render hook. It basically lets you test the brain of your hook without having to build a whole component body around it. You can call the hook, check its return values, and make sure the logic works perfectly, all in isolation.
Now here's a pro tip that'll save you a lot of headaches. Anytime your test code does something that causes your hook to update its state, you need to wrap that code in a little helper function called act. All act does is tell the test runner, hey, hang on a second, let React finish doing its thing before you check the results. This simple trick is the key to writing stable, reliable tests and avoiding those weird, flaky failures. And finally, performance. Inside your custom hooks, you can use two really powerful tools, useMemo and useCallback. Here's the simple way to think about it. Use useMemo when you have an expensive calculation and you want to save the answer. Think of it like caching the result. Use useCallback, on the other hand, when you want to save the function itself. This is super important when you're passing functions as props, because it prevents child components from re-rendering for no reason.
And there you have it. We went from a messy, repetitive problem to a clean, elegant, and reusable solution. We've seen that custom hooks are not just a cool feature. They're a fundamental tool for writing better React code. So the real question is, what piece of code in your own project are you thinking about right now? What's going to be your first custom hook? Thanks so much for joining me.